Right. Well, I'll lead us off. So, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. As you remember, I'm Ann Larson, the Director of Government Relations. I'm super excited today to introduce you to our new director, Tara, who's joining us. She joined us back in September, but is going to work really hard to get up to speed on this project. And she's going to be joining us for a lot of our new executive work group meetings as well. So, Tara, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Anne. Good morning, folks. I'm particularly excited to meet this group of people because I have been spending quite a bit of time already, actually, in the past 2 months, getting up to speed on this project, asking a gazillion questions to a very patient team. I started this conversation with my team basically saying, well, what brought us here? And so my briefing for this project started with, well, in 1951, and now I think we're on session 8 or so of a long series of briefings to make sure that I'm up to speed on all of the work that's gone around, not just the history, but all of the work that's gone around this final EIS project, giving me a great amount of respect as to the process, the people that have been involved, the professionals. I recognize that I'm coming into this project at a very critical time. So I want to reassure all of you who've worked so hard on getting us here, that I'm committed to continuing to steward this project the way you have, to getting us to a final EIS that is received with what we plan and hope is a great amount of respect for the rigor that's gone around the process from a scientific perspective, from a stakeholder perspective. And I think that all of that and hope and plan to ensure that all of that is seen as meaningful stakeholder input that results in meaningful preferred alternative recommendation here in the next couple of months that will make sense, and that will make sense from a funding perspective. I know there's a lot of work still to go into that, and the work that you're going to bring to that group and to that particular aspect of this project is very important. So please know that I'll be supporting you along the way, still learning about the project, but so honored really to be a part of it. So I know that the team has a great agenda for us this morning. So I'm going to stop talking and keep listening like I've been doing.
Thanks, Tara. All right, guys, let's get started.
I love that. That was such a good way to start the meeting. Thank you. I'm just so excited to go through it now. We're getting a phone call sound coming in. That's okay. Okay, so on the screen, everybody should see the agenda that we have proposed for our next 2 hours together. We will start with a description of the draft EIS engagement. We were very pleased with the interest and the level of response on the draft EIS, and we want to share those numbers with this group. We also would like to describe the themes that we are seeing in the draft EIS comment letter, recognizing, of course, that this is meant to be an overview. We won't be going comment by comment. And then given the themes that we see in the draft EIS comment letters, we'll talk about where we might focus our work in the final EIS. After that, we'll revisit the preferred alternative identification process. And this hasn't changed, but we continue to think that a shared understanding of the process is very important. Moving from there, we'll provide a last opportunity for input on prioritization of the selection criteria, and then go through the process to obtain your input on the selection criteria related to support for the alternatives. The last couple of things that we have to do, it's a packed agenda, is provide you with a schedule update. What are our key steps over the next several months? And then, of course, as per usual, end with an opportunity for public comment. Any questions on that before we get started? Okay, seeing no hands waved, I will pass it off to Ray Outlaw.
All right, good morning, everyone. As Tessa mentioned, We just wanted to give you a quick brief summary of the activities and outcomes during the draft EIS comment period over the summer. In total, we had 868 submissions, and submissions is a fancy word for saying emails, comment forms, letters, etc. All the things that got sent to us as comments on the draft EIS. We heard from each of you, each of the EWG members, so thank you for that, and also from a variety of other sources at the federal, state, local, tribe level, and then numerous local individual organizations and businesses. We also participated in 25 meetings, including briefings with each of the EWG entities and numerous stakeholder briefings. We appreciate your invitations to those briefings. They were really helpful for us and hopefully for you as well, and for you just taking the time to arrange those for us and to meet. And despite COVID limitations, we did reach quite a few people through our online tools. So over 1,300 unique visitors and 2,000 total visits to the online open house. We know that although we don't have counts, we had quite a few people visiting the kiosks around Capitol Lake. And we sent over 32,000 emails during that time period, as you probably are all too familiar with at this point. So in total, we're really happy with that. The comment total was more than double the scoping comments, and they are rich in context and detail, and we're going to talk about that, just how rich here in a bit. If there are no questions, I will just go to the next slide and hand it over to Carmen.
Great, thanks, Ray. So this graphic gives you a quick snapshot of the distribution of the comments we received by topic. You'll see in the far left, water quality received the largest number of comments, followed by comments related to funding and governance and project costs, cultural resources, fish and wildlife, land use, shorelines, and recreation, and then fairly equally distributed amongst the rest of the general topics. A lot of the comments stated an alternative preference. And while all comments will be considered in the final EIS and in decision-making, comments that stated a preference will not be tallied. And this is because voting is not part of a SEPA process. The purpose of SEPA comment process is to comment on the adequacy and completeness of the analysis so it can be improved in the final EIS. It's not about general support or opposition to one alternative over another. Next slide. The team is still in the process of reviewing and considering comments, but we wanted to share what we're seeing as the final EIS focus areas, at least on a preliminary basis, knowing that these focus areas are subject to change as we continue to digest all the comments. For water quality, the final EIS will include an evaluation of potential compliance with state water quality standards and anticipated TMDL allocations. Ecology has weighed in on the ability of the alternatives to meet state water quality standards, and the team now has information on TMDL allocations, which were not available during the draft EIS work. The funding and governance work group will be reconvened to confirm a long-term funding and governance approach for the preferred alternative. For transportation, the final EIS will consider additional mitigation opportunities that would avoid a long-term closure of the Fifth Avenue Bridge during construction. And I should say during construction of the estuary or hybrid alternative. We heard from the City of Olympia that this is important to avoid significant traffic congestion and associated safety and economic impacts during the closure period. For cultural resources, we heard that we should be coordinating with the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, or DAP, regarding the historic eligibility of resources in the project area. Our team agreed with this and has already requested and received DAP's formal determination of eligibility on project area historic resources. We'll be able to update the analysis for the final EIS to reflect those determinations. We also received a number of comments requesting that the EIS better describe the significance of the project area to tribes, and this will also be a focus area for the final EIS. Next slide. For navigation, we'll be describing potential impacts to navigation if funding is not available for long-term maintenance dredging as planned. For public services and utilities, the team received specific information from LOT that will help to better describe the potential regulatory and financial impacts to LOT and its ratepayers under future discharge allocations related to Ecology's TMDL. While not listed here, there were also a number of comments related to costs and economics. The team is currently reviewing these, and we anticipate refining information in the final EIS based on those comments. There were a number of comments that questioned assumptions used in various analyses in the EIS that will need to be discussed with various regulatory agencies in order to confirm these. So we anticipate coordination with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Ecology, WDFW, and DNR related to these comments. And finally, we received a number of comments on the hybrid alternative that have led the team to reevaluate whether the hybrid alternative should include a freshwater reflecting pool instead of a saltwater pool. Next slide.
Hey, Carmen, maybe we could just pause there for a second to see if the group has questions on key comment themes.
Yeah, perfect.
Commissioner Zita?
You've already done some consultation with Army Corps of Engineers in the draft EIS, right?
Yes, certainly. They attended a handful of our technical work group meetings.
Right.
And we had coordination with them relative to frequency of maintenance dredging of the Federal Navigation Channel and potential future maintenance dredging.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Selby?
Thank you. Can you go back to slide 5? Possible. Here we are. So the cultural resources, I know we had a robust discussion around what qualifies as historic. So I'm really curious that what is DAP's, you said they've been engaged and that they have pointed out some resources that they want to, profile in the project area. Sorry, I'm not struggling with words. So what are we looking at? I mean, I know they talked about like the actual dam was historic.
Yeah, so if you recall in the draft EIS, it included an evaluation of structures that met basic historic criteria for listing. These were structures that hadn't yet been evaluated by DAP for their eligibility for being listed on a historic register. So we put these in front of DAP to review. They got back to us to indicate which structures don't meet criteria for listing, which do meet criteria for listing based on their evaluation. So the final EIS will update that information to reflect those determinations. And so for some historic resources, they said it doesn't meet eligibility requirements. Some, they said it did. And I don't think we're prepared to go into each resource at this time. We're still kind of digesting that information.
Okay, so at what point will we be briefed on that part of it? I don't put you on the spot. I mean, I just
yeah.
You can get back to us, but I'm just
Okay.
curious.
Yeah, I guess Tessa, I don't know, is that something we want to discuss now or get back to?
I think our next step is to, we just received, we are in coordination with DAP right now, and we are now beginning our work with the technical leads for the cultural and historic analysis. And once we've had an opportunity to dive into that material with them, I think that provides us the next step to then report out to this group. Mayor Comment?
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you. The transportation, you just focused on the closure of Fifth Avenue, but I know there were other transportation related comments. The trail system, for example, TRPC had a good summary of that. I don't know what else. I can't remember what else, but Were you planning on addressing those as well?
Yes, and I will say, I mean, for this presentation, we just hit on what we're seeing as like the primary or main focus areas, but for sure there are a number of other areas related to these resource topics, as well as other resource topics that will have some updated information or revisions based on comments we received, including, like you said, related to the trail information you provided.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this? Okay. Let's head forward. Okay, so just briefly about what to expect in the final EIS. Work on the final EIS includes considering all comments provided on the draft EIS. The final EIS will include responses to those comments. It will include revisions and updates based on public comment and new information. It will identify any additional mitigation plans and measures that would avoid, minimize, or compensate for significant impacts. These will be presented at a high level, recognizing that detailed design and mitigation measures will be developed during the design and permitting process. And the final EIS will identify a preferred alternative and proposed funding and governance approach. And I'll hand it back to, or hand it to, who am I handing it to here? I'll take over. Any questions on what to expect in the final EIS? Okay, all right. So we are now going to transition from the content of the draft EIS comments and where we might head in the final EIS to a focus for the rest of the meeting on the decision-making process, or the process to identify a preferred alternative. And this slide probably looks very familiar to the group. You remember that we presented this flow chart on the right of the slide at our meeting in May. And in that meeting, we walked through every step of this flow chart because, again, we just felt that that level of review and understanding was important for our stakeholders to have an opportunity to review in close detail. And we also provided this flow chart in the draft EIS, and the purpose of doing that was for continued transparency and to provide an opportunity for the public to comment on the decision-making process. Ultimately, we did not get much public comment on this process, and Enterprise Services will continue to follow this approach to identifying the preferred alternative. And as a reminder, the concept behind this whole approach is to ensure that a preferred alternative is identified based on the technical analysis from the draft EIS, stakeholder input, which is so important, and then other important factors like cost. And all of these are relevant to decision making, and the selection criteria that you also see on the screen help to provide a framework to ensure that all of this is considered as the alternatives are evaluated. Each of the alternatives will be scored relative to their performance against these selection criteria, and we'll revisit the selection criteria in the next couple slides in our meeting today. So what we want to do is to just go through, as a reminder, the steps that we will be completing as we develop the final EIS. And there's one kind of segment of the flowchart dedicated to this. And Ray, could you put your mouse over the first step down to the final EIS development? There you go. Okay. So at the top left of this final EIS development process, we have committed to sharing the comment themes and the final EIS focus areas with the stakeholders so that you know what may have changed since the draft EIS was issued. A good example of that is that the hybrid alternative may now include a freshwater reflecting pool rather than a saltwater reflecting pool. And we think it's important to provide you updates on that content so you can consider it and as we move through this process. The next step over to the right is preferred alternative selection criteria confirmed. We have confirmed the selection criteria. They have not substantively changed since the draft EIS, but we have added tribal treaty rights as an element to be considered specifically and uniquely under other environmental disciplines. That is the key comment theme that we heard from the draft EIS, and we've made that update. Otherwise, the selection criteria have not changed. And today, what we want to do is provide one last opportunity for feedback on how the selection criteria will be prioritized or weighted in this process. The next step at the center, at the core of this whole process, is to ask the executive work group and the community sounding board to provide input on the decision durability selection criteria. And again, when we say decision durability, what we mean is the ability of the alternatives to achieve long-term support. And we'll go over in our meeting today the process to solicit that input from you. The next step after that is that enterprise services will continue to evaluate the alternatives as the final EIS is developed, and we'll plug the input that we receive from the executive work group and the community sounding board into that process. And then once those steps are completed, the funding and governance work group will be reconvened to confirm the approach for long-term funding and governance. And we just know from the draft EIS comment period that that is a really critical piece of information that still needs to be developed. So we are working toward being able to reconvene that group. Any questions on just at a high level what our steps are in the final EIS development? Yes, Mayor Selby.
Thank you. Is this slide deck available somewhere else? Because I can't read this.
No problem.
I want to put my nose right up to the screen, but yeah, it's just a little, it's hard.
Small. We will send it out after the meeting, and we can also send just a PDF of the flow chart so that you can zoom in and see each step in detail.
And then will it be available somewhere else for the public to see?
Yes, we'll post it online on our project website.
Great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Commissioner Menser.
Thank you. Yeah, I haven't been involved as long as some of the other folks. What is the community sounding board? How many people are on it? Who, like, what kinds of seats are represent? Who do they represent? And then how do you interact with them in this piece of the process?
Great question. Carrie, did you want to start our response to that, or would you like me to?
I can start. Boy, back at the beginning of this process, so I suppose it was, I don't know, maybe early 2019, we put out the word that we were forming the community sounding board, and we asked people who were interested in participating to apply for membership. All of our engaged organizations, so CLIPA and DIRT and the downtown, or the Chamber of Commerce, and oh gosh, there's 6 or 8, I guess, community organizations that have a representative to the community sounding board. And then others stated their top areas of interest. So whether that was recreational boating or general navigation or downtown development or water quality, I mean, there was a whole list of interest areas. And so then when we looked through the folks who applied, we tried to get a diverse range of interests so that we would have people speaking up for all of those different areas. So I think we have, we started with 25, I think we have 24 on the group now. The group meets regularly, generally the same kind of schedule that the executive and technical work groups meet. And they've provided good input into the process. They told us what areas of recreation were most important to them. They looked at all our suggested viewpoints for where we would do the simulations of what the alternatives would look like. And they told us which ones were most important to them. And they've weighed in on this preferred alternative selection process as well. So that's kind of an overview, but Tessa, feel free to jump in on anything I've missed.
That was perfect. I don't have anything to add. Okay, thumbs up there. Mayor Comment?
Thank you. I should have asked this question earlier, but the final EIS, is it going to be the comments, some of these comments, obviously, especially your shift to a freshwater lake option pretty substantially changed the body of the document. Are you planning on actually revising the EIS, or is it more of a comment answer appendix like you typically see for an EIS?
Great question. We know that comment responses are an important part of the final EIS, and our intention is where needed, we would update the content in the body of the EIS too.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, let's head over to the next slide here. Okay, we have this slide because we have always collectively as a group, as a broad stakeholder group, always understood one of the key goals of this process, maybe the key goal, is to identify a preferred alternative. And it is so important that we do that at the right point in the EIS. And so this slide goes over what enterprise services feels is needed in order to make a durable decision. And we think a preferred alternative can be identified once enterprise services has three things. That includes the draft EIS, which is the body of technical work that discloses impacts and benefits of the project and the alternatives. Comments on the draft EIS and an understanding of those comments, because that will inform whether the draft EIS technical work is being updated or substantially represents the findings, excuse me. And if any additional technical work may substantively change what the draft EIS disclosed. And then the third component is input from this group and from the community sounding board relative to decision durability or which alternatives can be supported as the preferred. Enterprise services is continuing to kind of work through the latter, or the two out of three of these components. The next piece of information on this slide is a quote from policy guidance around an EIS process, which essentially says that a preferred alternative can be identified at any time in the EIS process, and the agency has wide discretion with regard to when and how to identify that preferred alternative. We think that the flowchart on the last page gives you a good understanding of when and how we intend to do that, but this just describes or really does document that the agency has discretion on when that will be done. Any questions on these mechanics before we moved into selection criteria? Okay. Ray is going to go through the input that we heard from our May work group meetings on the selection criteria, and then we'll have some discussion around any last feedback. So passing it over to Ray.
Okay, thanks, Tessa. So if you all remember way back in May, we asked you to do an exercise called a pairwise exercise where you compared each of these criteria against them on a one-to-one scenario. And so we collected all of that data from you. We collected those data from the technical work group as well as the CSB. And what you see on here is how each of those groups ranked the criteria collectively. And then On the far right column is the average ranking for each of those criteria. The left being the executive work group, all of you. All of those are in bold because when we took the average across the board, the average ranking and the executive work group ranking was identical in terms of 1 through 6. Now the percentages are different, and we'll switch to a new slide and talk about the percentages a little bit in a moment, but just pointing out that there's a lot of consistency between your prioritization and the overall average. And when we look in just a moment at the differences are actually quite small, even if it might flip the order just a little bit. So on the next slide, I'll show you the actual numbers. And so again, we take the pairwise exercise and we can convert that to a percentage. So roughly 33% of the time, performance against project goals scored above anything else, for example. And so again, the averages, if you look at the far left and far right columns, are slightly different, but the order is the same. I think the really interesting thing to look at too is even when there are differences in prioritization. So for example, environmental sustainability, the executive work group and the technical work group flips those. There's only 1% of difference here, and that is by no means a significant number in this very simple math exercise. So all in all, there's a clear high performer. Performance against project goals was important to everyone. There's a clear low importance being construction. And then those other 4 in the middle are really closely rated or weighted from everyone's perspective. And that isn't too surprising, right? We know all of these things are important. And so deciding which one is most important is one of the challenges, is why we're here. Any questions about those numbers or how we got to these numbers? And Tessa, we'll switch slides here in a moment and talk about exactly what that means for identifying a preferred alternative. Commissioner Zita?
It looks like the biggest difference in ranking of the criteria between the 3 groups is that the community sounding board ranked other environmental disciplines last, whereas the executive work group and the technical work group ranked it high.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And some of that may just be to the fact that there's 24 of them and they have a wide range of interest and what's important to them versus the technical work group, which is responsible for water quality and invasive species, right? All of those things that fall into environmental disciplines. So that's probably where some of that difference comes from. Other questions? Okay, Tessa, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, so what you see in this table is Ray has pulled forward the averaging of the prioritization or weighting from the mathematical exercise that we just looked at on the last slide. And what we kind of always feel is important in these mathematical exercises is to recognize that it should not just be that. It should not just be a direct output of the numbers where there might be a single percentage point that is different. What is also important in these exercises is to have kind of the human look at this and to make sure that is the math representing what we as the executive work group are trying to convey. And we'll ask the same question to the other groups that we have done this exercise with. And so what we want to do on this slide is just pause and have discussion around whether there's a compelling reason to change the order of how the executive work group prioritized these selection criteria. So maybe just taking a minute to look at this, and if something is coming up to you, if you feel that I really feel that one of these needs to be elevated or something along those lines, this is a good opportunity to let us know. Mayor Selby?
Just a reference to a spreadsheet that we were asked to fill out with staff last week on decision durability. So, you know, I noticed that it's ranked 4th out of 6. And so but you still want more input from us, from our organizations on that. So I want to know more about that.
Oh, okay. Good question. For this slide, what we are doing is we're creating a linkage back to the exercise in May where we went through the pairwise exercise and just prioritized how the criteria should be weighted. And so this question is really based on how the criteria are shown in this table, does that reflect how you feel they should be prioritized? Do you feel that decision durability, for example, should be 4th on the list? I'm picking on that one since you brought it up. We'll get into the mechanics of how we solicit your input on decision durability and what feedback you might give us relative to that in the next couple slides. But here we're looking at, is the weighting or prioritization of the criteria consistent with what you feel the executive work group feedback should be? Does that make sense, or did I miss anything from the group? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Zita?
I appreciate that the original goals and criteria have been expanded in this process, and I just want to check and see if I'm remembering the original project goals correctly. That was improve water quality, improve ecological functions, manage sediment, and enhance community use of the resource. Is that those 4 were the original project goals?
Yep, those are the goals and they remain consistent today.
Great, thank you. I think this all looks good. You've done a great job.
Okay, great. Thank you for that feedback. Mayor Komet?
Similarly, have you defined, I can't remember, did you define other environmental disciplines or environmental sustainability? What's encompassed within those terms?
Yes, we did. Great question. The other environmental disciplines are the disciplines where there were significant impacts or significant benefits. And so those include disciplines like cultural resources, wetlands, fish and wildlife, environmental health. And this is our opportunity to just consider in the decision-making process those significant impacts or benefits. The environmental sustainability we had defined as the net improvement to or the net benefit, overall net benefit from the alternative over a 30-year time frame, and also the level of active management that would be required in the project area to achieve project goals.
Where does cultural I guess cultural resources and historic fit in here?
They are reflected in other environmental disciplines, and so that includes cultural and historic, and then also the addition of the tribal treaty rights, which I mentioned a couple slides ago.
And I'll just clarify, it can be confusing with the way it's described. It's other environmental disciplines, and this is just to recognize that some environmental disciplines are already reflected in performance against project goals, such as water quality.
Good point. Thank you, Carmen. So Mayor Komet, hearing that additional definition, hopefully that was helpful around what we're looking at for other environmental disciplines and environmental sustainability. When you look at how these are prioritized, does this feel like representative of the input that you were hoping to give to the group? Or is there anything that you feel should be changed? Any compelling reason to change what's shown here in terms of priority?
Well, I think I mean, on the surface, no. I think this decision durability, I think focusing a little more on that is important. I think you're going to do that because, you know, part of this is how the legislature is going to react. I mean, if we end up picking ultimately, if you end up picking the hybrid alternative, we know there'll be some pushback from the legislature on that, and just because of cost. And so knowing whether that's something that's needed to guarantee decision durability or not, I think is an important consideration here. But I don't think I would change the ranking. It seems to make sense. Certainly the bottom two I would put there where they are, and certainly the upper two where they are. Those middle two, whether you would switch them or not, I don't know.
Okay. So I think what I'm hearing from you is that the prioritization as it's shown is generally about right, but that there might be an increased weighting of decision durability in your opinion because of its importance with the legislature. Okay.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have similar or differing opinions on that feedback that we just heard from Mayor Komet? Commissioner Zita?
Well, I agree with Mayor Komet that decision durability is important. Environmental sustainability will contribute to decision durability. I think that the rankings are appropriate as they are.
Okay. I'll just say, as people are continuing to consider, we appreciate you doing this with us again. We do want to provide an opportunity for you to think about this. And if there is additional input you'd like to provide to the project, we can take that in writing. You can send an email to Carrie by no later than November 19th, which is the Friday before the Thanksgiving week. We got this request from the City of Olympia and from some other stakeholders about just one last opportunity to take a look at this following our May exercise. So before we head into the next set of slides, anyone else? Any other thoughts? Okay. When we send this slide deck to you following the meeting, we'll just put a reminder in that email that November 19th is the date to provide any last input on prioritization here. Oh, Mayor Selby?
Yeah, I don't know whether you had a slide that showed the calendar of when you're going to be meeting with the community sounding board, or maybe you already have, or the technical work group. Have you already met with them?
Good question. We meet with them next Wednesday. We meet with the technical work group, I think it's in the morning, and then the community sounding board that evening. We'll also do the same exercise with them and then ask if they have any follow-up feedback on these to provide input by the 19th. So that's sort of the deadline for everyone.
So they'll have an even more compressed timeline to respond.
They will.
Okay, because I might share this ahead of time then with the people that represent the technical work group.
Yeah. That seems totally fair, especially since we'll have it on the website and it will be accessible to everybody.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, not hearing anything else, we're just going to cruise on through. Okay, so now let's move into decision durability, how we receive this input from the group. What you see on this slide is our comments that we have pulled from the draft EIS comment letters from each of the executive work group entities. 4 of the 6 of the executive work group entities did indicate a preference toward the estuary alternatives as part of their draft EIS comment letters. The Port of Olympia and Thurston County did not indicate a preference on the alternatives. And what we want to say in this slide is that we hear you. And we also think that this input and your comments on the draft EIS will be particularly helpful as we move into the decision durability exercise, which starts on the next slide. But before we go there, any comments from the group on what we're seeing here or what we're not seeing here? Okay. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. On this side, we are now formally asking each of the executive work group member entities to provide your input on the alternatives. And we have sent to you a one-page list of questions that will help you to provide input that plugs directly into the preferred alternative identification process. There are two key components to that input that we're asking. One is we're asking you to numerically score each of the alternatives, and the scoring's on a scale of 1 to 10. You can see in the small font, or maybe you can't see on the screen, that we score numerical scores from 8 to 10 would be fully supporting or mostly supporting the alternative. Numerical scores from 4 to 7 would be mostly supporting to partially supporting that alternative. And numerical scores from 1 to 3 would be low support or no support for the alternatives. We are asking you to assign a numerical score in coordination with folks in your organization. And the reason that we're asking for that numerical score is because it allows enterprise services to pick that up and move it directly into their larger numerical scoring of the alternative. So this is direct input into that process. And we're also asking you for narrative responses on what increases or what decreases your support for each alternative. It's really important that we get a response for each alternative so that we have scoring for each one. And the narrative part is important because it will become a component of the documentation that will go into the final EIS about how the preferred alternative was ultimately identified. So even though it's not a number, it's just as important as the number. And we think for some of you, you will be able to draw on your comments for the draft EIS for that part of the exercise. But if you didn't provide input on the alternatives as part of your draft EIS, or you focused on just one alternative, we are asking for narrative responses for each. In our prep for this, we have said to each other, and we feel this strongly, that we think reasoning or rationale around why something is, why you support an alternative, it's just as important to know why an alternative is not supported. And so our request here is for the executive work group to begin coordinating internally. And our hope is that each entity will have a single response that represents their organization's standpoint and represents the constituents that you represent. And we expect that you'll be coordinating internally over the next couple of weeks. And the last bullet on this slide describes that we'll have an opportunity to touch bases with each of you as you're completing this exercise to see if you have questions. If there's clarifying questions that you have, we're here to answer those, and generally just to get feedback from the group as you work through this. So let me see if Ray, Carmen, Carrie, or Anne have anything to add, and then we'll just open this up for questions. Anything that I missed? No? Okay. No? Okay, great. Mayor Selby.
Sure, I was trying to figure out when to ask this question, but this might be a good time. I'm just curious as to when the pivot happened from a saltwater hybrid to a freshwater hybrid option, because it seemed like for years that was, as part of this process, that the freshwater was not really considered viable as an option. And now is that when we're looking at hybrid, this is so I can help explain this to staff. When we're talking about the hybrid, we're talking about a freshwater lake now and not a saltwater lake.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And that go ahead.
Well, I just would like some clarification on when that pivot happened.
That pivot happened as a result of comments we received on the draft EIS. And what we heard as part of those draft EIS comments was that the saltwater reflecting pool may have additional water quality impacts that hadn't been fully evaluated, that there may be issues with fish entrapment as a result of the tide gates, and that there wasn't stakeholder support for the saltwater alternative. And the freshwater alternative does not have those issues and does have stakeholder support. So we're heading in that direction.
So would it be, how would we get the fresh water in there? Are they still talking about the idea of the artesian waters being piped in, or?
At this point, yes, just groundwater. Yeah.
Okay, groundwater. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Zita?
Do you want these responses on the decision durability ranking from our board or our staff?
Our goal is to have as much coordination internally that may reflect input from your board and your staff in a single response. If a single response isn't possible, then I think our goal would be to coordinate with each entity on who might conduct that scoring for one package of responses, likely at the board and the executive level, commission level.
So our earlier response was drafted by staff. It was a staff response. And I expect staff would be happy to do that again. But board perspectives may vary.
Yes, understood. And we know that that may be a challenge for some entities, that there is varying opinion and input. I think our belief is that having that range of perspectives will increase the defensibility of the decision-making process, recognizing that you can put in varied opinions, and considering the rest of the criteria, we may have an alternative that is apparent through the numbers. We haven't done that yet. We are not at that point in the exercise. This team has remained neutral and has committed to not doing that until we have all the information that is needed. But we think plugging all the information in is the way to test and make sure that we get a durable decision, and not selecting or cherry picking what goes into that matrix.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Munzer?
I have a question. It might be hard to answer, but I'll just give it a shot. Ray mentioned at the check-in that I had, or that the small group thing we did last week, that when kind of high-level overview of public comment was that people were kind of polarizing toward the managed lake or the estuary. There was kind of a dwindling level of support for the hybrid. That's what I understood him to say. And so that I'm trying to square that with the comments I heard earlier this morning, that that caused this pivot toward freshwater. And sounds like you did get a lot of support for a hybrid option if it was powerful enough to cause you to kind of change that whole thing. So I'm just wondering, is there a discrepancy there? Did I hear one or both of those pieces wrong, or how do I square all that up?
Good question. I'm glad you asked it. I would say that the comments that we received on the hybrid alternative that supported enterprise services in switching from a saltwater to a freshwater were really specific to the water types and the potential impacts or benefits of an either or. It wasn't a key comment theme, but we got targeted and kind of important feedback relative to potential impacts that weren't evaluated. And so I think that's how I would characterize what triggered a change in the alternative. And then Ray, maybe you want to fill in some detail on what you were describing relative to input overall from the stakeholders.
Yeah, thanks, Tessa. This to me actually is a really great example of that quality over quantity in terms of EIS comments. Although we didn't receive hundreds of comments that say look at a freshwater reflecting pool, the comments we did get said look at a freshwater pool and here's why. And that why is what's really important to understanding why we might need to make that change. And then to the other half of your comment, yeah, again, we didn't count them. So I'm speaking sort of anecdotally here, but what we heard was quite a bit of support for an estuary, quite a bit for the managed lake, and really focused comments on the hybrids. But I would say not a volume of comments on the hybrid.
Thank you. And just if I could piggyback one more comment, I'm kind of where Zita is in terms of the process and my board and staff. And I know I had a one-on-one with Carrie. Not only is there, even if each commissioner had a very specific point of view, there'd still be a challenge of varying points of view and how to characterize that in a meaningful way to you. But then what I heard, I presented this on Thursday to the Board of County Commissioners, and what I heard was a reluctance to really even, from my seatmates, to even engage in filling this out. They have a lot of concerns about funding governance and where that's going, and not, we can kind of look at the price tags, but we don't know exactly how we're going to be going about managing the funding. So they were very reluctant to engage in this at all without more information about that. So that's kind of like two levels of problem I have to try to get you what you need by the time you need it. So what that's worth.
And Commissioner Mensah, when your fellow commissioners have hesitation around filling this out relative to funding and governance, is it relative to potential magnitude of cost, or is it relative to the type of funding and governance that may be applied to each of the alternatives?
I would suspect it's both, but I think I've tried to explain as best I can from what I've understood from the meetings I've attended, kind of where preliminary discussions have been and where this seems to be headed. But I still just keep getting, if we don't know we don't know how to weight the varying costs without knowing who's paying through what mechanisms those costs over the long term.
Uh-huh.
And that, I think that will weigh heavily on at least one or more commissioners' scoring of the different alternatives. That's an individual thing, but I think both elements of what you identified are probably relevant.
Understood. And we have preliminary recommendations from the funding and governance work group, and I'm sure you know this, but I should just say it, relative to what long-term funding and governance might look like for each of the alternatives. There's been a recommendation for the managed lake that long-term funding stays with the state. There has been a recommendation, or there is interest across the board for potential shared funding and governance of the estuary alternative across members of the funding and governance work group. And I agree that the potential long-term funding approach for a hybrid at this point is unclear. What we don't have is the mechanism of how that funding would come into place or the allocation of that yet. The work group has said, and Thurston County as part of this work group, they have said that they are not interested in providing or continuing that work until a preferred alternative or a likely preferred alternative is identified. So we're kind of at this catch where your input is needed to continue to move the process along to reconvene the funding and governance. And the funding and governance feels that they can't meaningfully reconvene until we've received that input. And so this is where we really get to a place of what we know is the whole goal of this is to solicit input that helps a decision to be durable. And if what we need to hear from the commissioners is that my support is this based on these assumptions, that is helpful for enterprise services to consider as they're evaluating the alternatives. And so I know that it only gets us so far, though, so I just wanted to offer that as a potential response, and maybe others have something to add here.
I think that's helpful as far as the second piece of what I described. We still have, probably very different points of view within the board, so I still have to wrangle with that, but that's helpful. Thanks. Right,
absolutely. I failed to mention that the funding and governance initial recommendation for construction is that the lion's share of that is with the state, regardless of the alternatives. And then my last thought was, I feel, and I said this in response to Commissioner Zita, that the more input, even if it's varied, that we can get into this decision-making process, the more defensible and durable it is. I think it is best if there is a unified position from each of the member entities based on your internal coordination, because it means we have coordinated and we generally believe that this is where our support lies for each of the alternatives. But if we can't get there, we still feel that getting input from each entity is really needed to make a defensible and durable decision. And so I don't want to shy away from there being potential difference of opinion in an organization, if that exists. And Carrie and Anne and Director Smith are available if there are questions as you're working through this, if it would be helpful to have kind of an early meeting with the entities as you get started. And then again, of course, we have meetings or opportunities, to touch base in December before this feedback is expected to be received. Mayor Selby.
Thank you. I can't help but listen to this discussion and not realize that we've got a transportation bill that just passed in DC, and I'm hoping that this is on the radar for DES, that the sooner we can get to a preferred outcome, so that because regardless, the Fifth Avenue Bridge needs to be, if it stays a lake, it still needs to be redone. There's so much infrastructure around that area that is past its useful life. So we need to be, in the queue for getting funding, and there's lots of money that's going to be available. And so I just want to expedite this so that we can get in the line for some of those dollars, so that we can make this happen, and it won't land so much on just the state or the stakeholders. So that's more of a comment than anything.
Thank you. And I know you have been doing some thinking around that, and this is all very much on your radar. Anything that you'd like to share there?
No, Mayor Selby, that's a great comment, that we are tracking that. And obviously the sooner that we've got some indication where local support is, it's good for our decision makers, because we are talking with our legislators now and kind of talking about different alternatives and where we would go with things. So appreciate that comment. It's on our radar too.
We suspect that the funding and governance, when they are able to reconvene, will certainly be looking at the mechanisms, and that will, depending on the alternatives, there would be a range of potential federal funding opportunities that should really be identified through that process. So once a decision is made, that those opportunities, regardless of the alternative, can be, the team can head after them. Okay, I feel like there's a lot on this slide, and really the whole thing is to say this is the chance where we really are asking for input to plug into the process, and this is the kind of format that we're proposing to use. We're sending these same questions to the community sounding board, exact same questions. And just thank you in advance. Okay, so this is a timeline that shows you really what we suspect as, a little over a month and a half for internal coordination. Some entities that might be easy because you already did it in support of the draft EIS. And regardless, we are available during this time for questions and do anticipate a touch point in December for formal clarifying questions and feedback. And then December 17th is the date for the calendars of when we're asking for those completed forms to be sent back to Carrie. Carrie, team, anything else to add, or Commissioner Zita, question?
So some of these conversations will be one-on-one or not public. Will you be meeting with our boards publicly also?
At this time, we're not anticipating that. And if there is need for that, if it supports the process, we can consider if that is, can make ourselves available.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Mayor Selby?
Sorry, I feel like I'm dominating, but something that needs to be addressed is that I know Commissioner Zita is rotating off or leaving her position, and then as well, Mayor Pete Kmet is leaving his position. And so are there plans for bringing whoever they've chosen from their bodies to represent on this group? Is there time set aside to bring those folks on board?
Yes, certainly before new executive work group members join the executive work group, we've always found there to be value in having a briefing to go over what is the project, what is the state of the union, where are we headed, what is important information for you to know. And we think that this timing of soliciting input relative to member entity support does align with Mayor Kmet and Commissioner Zita still being in office and holding that institutional knowledge that they should really bring to those internal discussions and with their successors to kind of bring them along in the process with them so they see how they have scored and for what reasons. And so there was certainly thinking about this timing relative to those, to just global transitions across the project.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this? Okay, oh my goodness, we are cruising. We just have one more slide and then we're going to break for public comment. What we want to do on this slide is make sure we are reporting out on where we're heading in the next couple months. So in prep for, I'll start in October, in prep for this meeting and for work in the final EIS, of course, we have been going through all of the comments on the draft EIS, and we are taking those and figuring out, given what we heard, how do we focus our work in the final EIS. And this month we have this work group meeting today. As I mentioned earlier, we meet with the technical work group on the 17th and the community sounding board on the 17th. We'll be going over the same content. And as Carmen mentioned, we heard in the draft EIS that there could be opportunities for the team to confirm assumptions with our agency counterparts. And so that coordination will begin as soon as we're able. In December, we'll continue on to progress on the steps that we went over in the decision-making flowchart, and then we will be soliciting input from the executive work group and the community sounding board on decision durability so that that can be plugged into the identification process. And then next year, there would be opportunity to reconvene the funding and governance work group and to prepare the final EAS, including findings from the funding and governance work group, because we know that the approach to long-term funding and governance is so important. And then the legislature has provided the team the schedule target of issuing the final EIS with the preferred alternative and approach for funding and governance by mid-2022. And we are still holding that target. Any questions on next steps?
Wow, that's a quick timeline. You've got your work cut out for you.
Yes, I appreciate that comment. Thank you. Okay. Let's see if there are comments from the public.
Yes, Tessa, I just put in the chat, but for those of you that are listening and might not have seen the chat, if you just use the raise hand feature, we can identify who from the audience might like to make a comment. Not seeing anyone. You can also, if you're having trouble with that, you could also send me a message in the chat.
Yeah, quick point of process. I'm not sure that people can use the raise hand tool if they're not if they're just observing and not in the meeting. So
They should be able to in this format.
great.
There we have some hands.
There we go. All right. Let's see. Steve, you should be able to unmute and speak now.
I was just raising the hand to make sure it was working for everybody.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Sure.
And Steve Finney.
Hey, good morning. Steve Finney with the Recreation Boaters Association. Yeah, I agree. This is a very aggressive timeline and you do have your work cut out for you. There's been a lot of work put into this so far. My big concern is that the financial evaluations would have a significant impact on the priority. And it seems like it's backwards not to have the full information on how the funding would work, the long-term funding, without to have that after a decision's been made, or at least a preferred alternative has been created. And it seems like that information should be part of that preferred alternative decision instead of afterwards.
Great point. Thank you, Steve. We typically don't respond to public comment, but I just want to make sure that I was being very clear in my wording earlier. The decision on a preferred alternative will not be final until the final EIS. And we do anticipate work with the funding and governance work group in progress toward that final EIS, and totally hear that if something, that their findings could substantively change the way that the alternatives had been scored if there are a big new, if there are big new findings from their process.
Okay, thank you, Tessa.
Thank you. I am not seeing any other hands raised. I'm thinking we're at the end of the public comment then. And with that, we're at the end of our meeting. We thank you so much for being with us, not only in this meeting, but in this process and the work specifically that we're doing over the next couple months. And just really want to share so much appreciation for the work that went into the draft EIS comments. Those have really helped the work that we'll be doing in the final EIS, and the decision durability feedback really will help enterprise services to make a durable decision. So thank you all for your time, and hope you have a happy holiday season, and we'll see you in December.
Yeah, thanks, guys.